Kia ora, my name is J.D. This is Ithaca Bound by Kirsten McKenzie. I'd like to start off with a quick apology to Kirsten for how long it's taken to get this video up. Life was complicated and got busy, so I do apologize for that. Let's get into Ithaca Bound. Roman ruins, a reluctant time traveler, and an army under threat. Can one woman slip back through time to avert a slaughter and save the man she loves? When ancient ruins are discovered on a Northumberland farm just south of Hadrian's Wall, emotions boil over as treasure seekers and the government descend like locusts. But ancient altars aren't the only riches beneath the soil of Ithaca Farm. History lurks beneath the thin veneer of time, and when the past colludes with someone much closer to home, the greatest threat to the 21st century isn't necessarily the Roman army. Excellent cover, by the way, and if you don't like it, you're lying. Also, must have a map. Good job. Chapter 1. The Accident. Attending a Halloween costume party in a town where her lawyer was the only person she knew was, as expected, an unmitigated disaster. Lillian Arlosh had not factored in the possibility that she wouldn't be able to identify Darren Saunders amidst a pair of human-sized pea-pods, scarily realistic versions of Michael Jackson and Prince, as well as a veritable army of Roman centurions and at least 4 King Henrys. Of the lawyer, there'd been no sign. A newly arrived resident of Hexham in northern England, Lillian Arlosh spent 2 torturous hours regretting her life decisions before deciding to leave with 3 glasses of warm Chianti under her belt and a stomach lined with soggy canapes and dry sausage rolls. As she drove the narrow laneways out of Hexham, through an airy late autumn mist blanketing the countryside, Lillian glanced another look at her GPS, before returning her eyes to the road. A dark figure emerged from the mist. Lillian slammed on the brakes, swerving violently to the left, the brakes squealing with the sudden engagement. The car grazed the ancient stone wall lining the narrow country road, scraping the length of the passenger side, before careening head-first into a shallow ditch, the engine whining in agony. With no airbag in the ancient vehicle, Lillian's head hit the steering wheel, only the seatbelt saving her from certain death. Blood gushed from the wound, running into her eyes, staining the steering wheel. The revving engine pierced the deathly silent night air. The car door opened, and a face loomed over her, one which was both familiar and yet unknown. "Did I hit you?" she asked, before slipping into an unconscious fugue in his arms. "Ego adsum," he said in Latin. "I am here." Lillian didn't stir as the stranger carried her from the car, her blood staining the leather of his ancient uniform, but her laboured breaths slowed until her chest returned to its familiar rhythmic motion. Unbeknown to her, the soldier brushed the hair from her face and wiped the blood from her face. "Ego adsum, expediatur quiquam mali tempus," he said. "I am here. You are safe." He laid her on the ground before a sound in the distance caught his attention. Casting one more glance towards her, he disappeared, just as Lillian came to. Groggy, Lillian used the stone wall to push herself up, her mind full of her father's warnings about never swerving for an animal. But it hadn't been an animal she had swerved to miss. It was a man who'd appeared from nowhere. Had she hit him? Lillian wiped the blood from her eyes, her head agonizingly sore. Everything was a blur. She didn't even remember getting out of the car. Confusion and fear fought for dominance, and although she'd never vocalize it, she'd swear that the man she hit had been dressed as a Roman soldier. "Hello?" she called out. No answer. Was it a Halloween prank? Lillian stood in the road, her heart pounding and hands shaking. There was no sign of the man. The lane was too narrow for him to have vanished, or for her to have mistaken his shadow for anything other than that of a man. A blurred memory tugged at the edges of her mind. Had he helped her out of the car? Lillian couldn't remember opening the door, let alone climbing out of the damaged car. A glint in the moonlight caught her eye. Bending down, she pulled at the metal, still attached to what looked like a blanket. A brooch snagged on a woolen cape. Part of the man's costume? As Lillian examined the tubular brooch, another car appeared, its headlights glaring bright. At first glance, it looked like it wasn't going to stop, and Lillian pushed herself up against her car. It slowed to a crawl, then stopped. "Do you need a hand?" the driver asked, unfolding himself from the Fiat. At almost 6 feet tall, he loomed over Lillian. "It's stuck in the ditch," Lillian replied, her voice quavering. "There's nothing you can do unless you've got a tow rope?" The driver shook his head, his black hair with a distinctive white streak obscuring his eyes. "Sorry, no rope. Are you okay? Is that blood?" "I thought I swerved to miss someone," she said, conscious of a car full of eyes watching. "But I can't see anyone. It was probably an animal. Do you need an ambulance?" Lillian touched her head, still sticky with blood. "It was a man," she said. "Like one of those reenactment guys. Dressed like a Roman soldier," she mumbled, turning away, pacing the road, her cheeks infused with red. Focusing on her phone, she tried dialing the number of roadside assistance, anything to deflect her embarrassment. "It could have been a deer. We have them here. Although on All Hallows Eve you never know what might be stalking these fields," he laughed, but must have seen the unimpressed look across her face, because his laughter cut off like the electricity after a terrible storm. You don't get any cell phone connection up here, not until you're up on top of the hill." "Come on, Badger!" yelled a girl from the car. A chorus of complaints from the back seat joined in. "We can go the other way." "Cell phone coverage here is as useful as a sieve in a boat," he laughed, his lame joke diffusing the tension. "I'll call them when I'm in range. My name is Badger. It's really Andy, but everyone calls me Badger on account of my hair," he said, tugging at the prominent white streak. "Lillian Arlosh. I only need a tow up to Ithaca Farm." "Ithaca Farm?" "I just moved in." How she came to own the place was too much for a roadside conversation with a stranger. Badger looked like he had something else to say, but one of the passengers sounded the horn. "I'll ring roadside assistance and they'll be here soon enough. But you should see a doctor too, about your head." Badger seemed to hold her eye for a moment longer than necessary before jogging back to his car, throwing a casual wave behind him. Badger's car reversed up the lane, pulled into a driveway, and drove off the way it had come, plunging the lane back into its unnatural darkness. Lillian shivered, and not from the night air. The mist seemed thicker now, amplifying the sounds of the night which had returned. Owls, the snuffling of woodland creatures, running water, marching boots. Lillian twisted her head, trying to locate the source of the sound. Snatches of muted conversations drifted towards her, too far away to decipher. A laugh, the metallic jingle of a horse harness, a cry, followed by another one, then another, full of anguish, perhaps, then just the heavy beating of an owl's wings. The broken pin of the brooch in her hand pricked her hand, leaving a tiny smear of fresh blood on her skin. Chapter 2. Ithaca Farm. After jumping down from the frigid cab of the tow truck, Lillian trudged across the unpaved driveway into the house she now called home. To her, it was anything but. It was in the wrong country to start with. Her face flamed as she remembered the hostile stares of the passengers in Badger's car and the lack of warmth from the tow truck driver. He'd seemed less than impressed with her predicament, only agreeing to tow the car because of its proximity to the farm. She'd been warned that small towns weren't all church fates and kindly neighbours, but more a hotbed of decades-old feuds and anger at big city dwellers in all things government. Strangers and foreigners were as welcome as an infestation of Death Watch beetles. The door swung open without her even turning the key. The lock hadn't engaged. Anyone could have come inside and robbed her blind. Not that she cared if the family's silver went missing. It wasn't as if she spent hours buffing the stuff to a mirror-like sheen. A half-formed memory of her mother polishing a tea set toyed at the edges of her mind, the pungent smell of silver polish heavy in the air. When she'd passed on, the silverware had come to Lillian, and for some reason she'd insured it, packed it, and carted it all the way to England. Now it sat accusingly on the sideboard, neglect turning it blacker and blacker. Burglars were welcome to it, and the memories it held. The wind had picked up as Lillian waited for hours until the local tow truck arrived to rescue her, and outside the kitchen window an old farm gate hung off its post, the wind crashing it into the stone wall. She added mending the gate to her long list to do. A list she hadn't intended ever to write, but life moved in mysterious ways. Chilled to the bone, despite the found cape she'd hung around her shoulders, Lillian stomped upstairs, slamming her bedroom door, uncaring as to the age of the hinges. Throwing herself onto her bed, she rolled to her side to stare at the wall so she didn't have to look at the unfamiliar room filled with unopened boxes and furniture which wasn't hers. Moving to Ithaca Farm hadn't been part of her life plan. Taking the traditional route after completing high school, she'd gone straight from school into university, where she'd bumbled through a degree in zoology, primarily because she didn't know what she wanted to do and liked animals. A good enough reason to become a zoologist, especially when the Earth's fauna were disappearing faster than an ice cream at the beach. After graduating, she'd fallen into a conservation role with the local council, the sort of role one does for a few years before marrying and producing 2.4 children. That's the life her parents had raised her to expect. And although Lillian was living it, apart from the marriage and procreation side of things, she didn't love it. And then her parents had died. Not a memory she enjoyed dwelling on. Bad things happened to good people. That was life. But it had derailed her life. And just when it felt like she couldn't cope anymore, Ithaca Farm had fallen into her lap. An unexpected inheritance from a grandfather she didn't know she had. Clutching her battered toy panda bear, the one she'd gone to bed with every night as a child, Lillian cried for the life she'd left behind, grieving for her family. Moving to England wasn't the answer to her problems. Working a Northumberland farm seemed so far beyond her skill set that she felt paralyzed every time she did think about the mammoth task ahead. But deep down, she knew what she wanted to achieve at the farm. Selling it was the easy option. But where would that leave her? Working for some not-for-profit but with a comfortable cushion of cash behind her. No, she planned on returning this tiny sliver of England back to nature. To rewild it. Lillian nuzzled deeper into the threadbare fur of Panda, wishing her father was here. He'd have turned the crash into a joke, and everything would feel better. Even his lame dad jokes used to make her smile. But he wasn't here, and never would be. She had no one to confide in. She had seen someone in the middle of the road. He must have dashed out from the hedge, his arms outstretched like he was appealing for help, or maybe warning her. And he had run off after she crashed. He hadn't been a figment of her imagination. He was real. The cloak at the end of her bed was evidence. She didn't know why he'd run off, but she'd never forget his face. A face she swore she'd hit, despite the complete absence of evidence. There would be words when she saw him again. Chapter 3. An Encounter in Town. With no serviceable car until the garage rang her back, Lillian hiked into town. The stunning landscape more than making up for the punishing hills between Ithaca Farm and Hexham. She paused to catch her breath and to check the map on her phone. A steady stream of school students flowed around her, accompanied by the easy patter of conversation between kids who'd spent their whole lives together in the same small town. Their uniforms echoed the post-war aesthetic, when the only available fabric was a dour grey wool combined with a surplus stock of blue Air Force-style shirts, and she could only imagine the chafing of the shirts and the scratchiness of the woolen skirts. The town had not embraced the move into the 21st century. The map showed that Hexham's public library was another 2 blocks from the school, almost 2 blocks too far for her city-raised legs. When the lawyer had explained that a serviceable vehicle was in the garage at Ithaca Farm, she hadn't imagined a car almost as old as the farm. Held together by wishes and good luck, it usually took several attempts, and much swearing, to get the thing started. But she'd sell her soul for the old thing to be operational now. With a deep breath, Lillian readjusted her shoulder bag and trudged through the cobbled streets, conscious of the crispness of the air and the absence of fumes. So different to Auckland. If she knew what she was looking for, she wouldn't have gone to the library. But she didn't. So an actual librarian was what she needed, before she ploughed onto the unknown and set about trying to rewild an area she knew nothing about. Focused on her map, she kept her head down, lifting it only to orientate herself with the street signs. Not the best of strategies. She walked into a solid, immovable object. The man from the accident. Despite it being a literal impossibility, Lillian prayed for the ground to open up and swallow her. "What the hell?" Lillian's knock had spilt his drink down his front, leaving an unsightly wet patch blooming on his trousers. "I'm so sorry," Lillian said. "Watch where you're going," Badger said. "Or you might see another Roman soldier," added a melodic voice. A blonde goddess appeared, with her arms crossed and a smile on her face. A smile which didn't reach her icy blue eyes. Holly Corbin. Every town has one. Desperately popular and horribly mean. "What did you say your name was? Vespasian or Hadrian? I get so confused with my Romans. Was it Nero? Nero also left a trail of behind him, a bit like you." "Nero also left a trail of destruction behind him, a bit like you." Holly laughed, tossing her hair and resting her manicured nails on Badger's arm. "It's Lillian, and like I said, I'm sorry," Lillian repeated, her cheeks flaming red. "It's just water. It'll dry," Badger replied. "I probably shouldn't drink and walk. The health and safety guys would deem that a hazard," he added, his smile infusing his face with a warmth wholly lacking in Holly. "You seem quite adept at crashing into things, Nero. Is that normal where you come from?" Holly sneered. Lillian opened her mouth to answer, just as Badger laughed. "Don't bother answering that. We're teasing. And don't get too upset about Holly calling you Nero. She has nicknames for everyone. So welcome to the club." Badger might not have heard, but Lillian couldn't mistake the huffy sniff emanating from Holly's pink-lined, gloss-encrusted lips and the subtle tightening of Holly's fingers. What was she saying? Possession was 9/10 of the law? "Anyway, nice to meet you again. We have an appointment to keep. I just hope they don't think I've wet myself." Badger laughed again and strode away in the opposite direction, Holly's heels clattering behind him. Lillian shook her head. Of all the people to bump into again, she'd barely even waved to her new neighbours, and her lawyer was the only other person she'd had an actual conversation with in Hexham. But to bump into Badger, literally, after what had happened at the scene of her accident, she couldn't help but blush. And that was chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Ithaca Bound by Kirsten McKenzie. That was very cool. Aside from an excellent cover, that is a very engaging story that's got me super interested. Ithaca Bound is the first in the Ithaca Time Travel trilogy as well, so go out and get yourself those 3 right away. I really like the, just as a slight aside, I really like the coming into a farm when you have no understanding of farming sort of storyline. I think of it as like an adult's version of Hogwarts. You get your ticket, you get your letter in the mail saying you've won a farm. It's just about as exciting. So yeah, Ithaca Bound. I think that was great fun, and I'm looking forward to reading the whole thing very shortly. Kirsten McKenzie is an independent Aotearoa author, and I will be including Kirsten's where you can buy this book and other books by Kirsten in the description, as well as Kirsten's social media pages. If you like this video, please give it a like and ring the bell, and if you want to see more like this, please do subscribe. If you'd like to discuss Ithaca Bound or anything else, or suggest a book for me to read or discuss any of the other books, please comment below, and I will see you all next time.